When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Goblins Rereads channel. Today's video, we're going to be doing Dany to A Clash of Kings. This is not my favorite chapter. It's not even my favorite POV line of the story. It's, in my opinion, probably the weaker parts of A Clash of Kings, but we're finally getting to Qarth. Now, it has been a long time since we've had a Daenerys chapter. I think the last time we had a Daenerys chapter was probably a good couple of months ago, which is really strange, right? You think about where we are in the story right now. We're a little under halfway through the story, and we've only gotten 2 Daenerys chapters, and even if you think about the length of her chapters, her first chapter wasn't all that long. I would say it was about average, and then her second chapter is pretty small. Like, it's only, for me, 10 pages of notes for my script, which is like half of what we had for the Theon script or the Catelyn script in the last couple of weeks. So yeah, let's just dive into Daenerys 2, and let's see what she's been up to in the unfortunate Qarth plotline. As we get into page 317, Daenerys approached Qarth. Men on the city walls beat gongs and blew unique horns shaped like bronze snakes. One thing you're really gonna notice with Qarth is it's very decorative. It's very upper class. There's a very big gap in terms of what Daenerys has been living through. So if we go back to book 1, she's living with the Dothraki, trying to integrate into their culture and understand them as a people. But here you go to almost the exact opposite, right? Where the people from Qarth are going to kind of look down on the Dothraki. And so I just find that really interesting, the differences that George decided to go with. He takes Daenerys in a very barbaric, poor class, even though she was being treated well as a Khaleesi in terms of she was getting a lot of things. She was still very rich in terms of marrying Drogo. But here, it's people that are just genuinely rich. They have things that they can buy, delicacies and things like that. As we continue, a column of camel riders emerged as her honor guard. The riders wore scaled copper armor, snouted helms with copper tusks, and long black silk plumes. Their camels were adorned with vibrant blankets of 100 different colors. And Piet Pri had described Qarth as the greatest city ever, the bridge between east and west, and so magnificent that Sathos the Wise had blinded himself after seeing it, given that it's just so beautiful. There would be nothing else more beautiful than it. That's really going to explain what Daenerys' plot is going to be about. It's kind of this surface level beauty, but underneath it, it's people that are trying to use Daenerys and trying to gain things from her because the dragons have now come into the world and people will lust after them, as we're going to see throughout her POV line. Dany doubted the warlock's exaggerations, but could not deny that Qarth was very grand. It is very easy on the eyes to look at. It has 3 massive walls of 30 feet, 40 feet, 50 feet, each designed completely differently. The people themselves, we just got talking about how 100 different colors on this clothing. It is a city that is looking rich. Dany describes the city being surrounded by 3 elaborately carved walls. The outermost wall, made of red sandstone and 30 feet high, featured carvings of animals like snakes, kites, fish, wolves, striped zorses, and monstrous elephants. The middle wall, 40 feet high and built of gray granite, depicted battle scenes, swords clashing, arrows flying, heroes fighting, infants slaughtered, and funeral pyres burning. You think about everything that happened within the first book, a lot of those things kind of parallel what Daenerys saw in book 1, how the Dothraki were treating other people after she had basically convinced Drogo to go to war and to try to go Westeros. You think about this, right? All the fighting that was going on, infants being killed, her own child dying, and the funeral pyre that started the whole Daenerys plot, really, with her hatching the dragons back. It kind of parallels Daenerys in a lot of ways. But as we get into page 318, the innermost wall of Qarth was made of black marble. I really am intrigued by the layout of this castle because you think about it, each layer looks completely different. It kind of builds up the allure of how rich Qarth is. But what is even more fascinating is that even though the other ones showed violence or animals, the innermost one shows things that were very explicit. They made Daenerys even blush herself, which is interesting given the fact that Daenerys did not shy away from looking at violence and things of that nature, because in a lot of ways within the Dothraki culture, she's come to accept that a bit, right? She's kind of grown from book 1. But something like sex, for instance, is something that she's not as used to. Like, she's still very young. She's only 15, Yes, she had Drogo as a husband and all that stuff, but she's still not, I guess, accustomed to all that type of stuff. It's kind of the way I've brought this up a couple times, I think, throughout the Game of Thrones reread and a Clash of Kings reread, how we kind of view sex now versus, years in the past and things like that. It's kind of because of, in a lot of ways, I think people have become desensitized to it just because of how much it's pushed down our throats through the media. I think that's an interesting little idea here with Daenerys. She reminded herself that if she could look at battle scenes on the Grey Wall, she had no reason to avert her eyes from depictions of pleasure. The city's three gates were banded with different metals, the outer with copper, the middle with iron, and the innermost with golden eyes. As Dany approached, all the gates opened for her. So we don't see something like we saw in the show, where the show tried to add a bit more tension with her stuff at Qarth, where, she wasn't immediately made a guest and all of that type of stuff. And I do want to bring up a point to you guys because, the show took its liberties in season two. In season two is really where a lot of the changes start to happen with the book material. What do you guys think about the way that D&D handled Daenerys in season two? I feel like the depiction of the show, I actually enjoyed a bit better. I know Emilia Clarke is not at her peak in terms of acting because of a lot of health issues that she was having during the time, but I think giving us a little bit more tension to that standoff there, of her actually getting to Qarth, I think is more entertaining to read than her just, being gifted everything and all of that stuff. But I don't know. I really would love to hear your guys' thoughts. I made a video on my other channel about Arya, and we talked a lot about, Arya in A Clash of Kings specifically. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts because, as the more you kind of get into this book, you see a lot of those differences between the book and the show. She saw small children wearing only golden sandals and some body paint run out to scatter flowers in her path. Even the children here are wearing golden shoes. It tells you how rich this city truly is. Qarth was bursting with color in stark contrast to the desolation of Vase Teloro. Another thing I want to point out, going back to the kids and kind of the paint, and they're not really wearing any clothing, also shows you a different side of this culture as well, where they bear a lot of skin, right? If you think about how the women are dressing up in this society, they leave, one breast empty or open, I should say, I guess. And we're going to see Daenerys actually even use that in A Dance with Dragons later on in the story. So it's interesting because Daenerys, in a lot of ways, is a kind of our insight into different cultures, especially in Essos. And so that's something I did want to kind of throw in there as well. But she also noted that the buildings were fantastical, painted in shades of rose, violet, and umber. Just a lot of different type of colored buildings. They all don't look the same. Maybe something like King's Landing, where a lot of the buildings do look the same. They're tightly packed together. She passed under a bronze arch shaped like two mating snakes, with scales inlaid with jade, obsidian, and lapis lazuli. I don't think I said that right, but, you guys are not here for my pronunciation. Towers soared higher than any Dany had ever seen, and fountains in the shapes of griffins, dragons, and manticores adorned the squares. It's interesting to think of all the things George could have named there. He names a griffin, which we know will be iconic with Jon Con, and then later on, that's going to be a huge plot point for Daenerys and young Griff. A dragon, which could also be a reference to young Griff, or just maybe herself or Jon or whatever, and a manticore. And these are very interesting, the creatures that is chosen to be named here. The Qarthian lined the streets and watched from delicate balconies, appearing tall and pale in their luxurious attire. The women wore gowns that left one breast bare, while the men wore beaded silk skirts. Like I talked about, just a very different fashion sense than how Daenerys has been with the Dothraki, something she's going to pick up. And, you think about the way Daenerys is coming into this city, she's going to feel very out of place. She doesn't look the part here. And you even think about the Dothraki, even more so, right? The Dothraki, their main goal is to invade other nations and take their things. And here you are going into one of the richest cities in the world. It's going to feel very awkward. And you even think about the way Daenerys is right now. She has one of my favorite, I guess, outfits that we see of her, where she has her lion skin robe that she had gotten from Drogo, and also had Drogon perched on her shoulder. But her clothing was very plain compared to that of the, people of Qarth. Her Dothraki had called the Qarthine milkmen for their pale skin, and Khal Drogo had once dreamed of sacking their city. For a Dothraki, this is like the ultimate prize. They're so rich in all these different things, but how would the Dothraki ever take Qarth? Like, that's the big part of it, right? They don't use siege engines. They're known for more, horseback warfare, open on the open, plains or fields or whatever. How are you going to get through 3 gigantic walls? And that's the issue the Dothraki run into. She wondered what her blood riders thought, fearing that they saw only potential plunder, which I think a lot of them who have never seen this kind of wealth would definitely be thinking that. Pyat Pri led them past statues of Qarth's ancient heroes, carved thrice life-size atop white and green marble columns. They passed through a vast bazaar housed under a lattice work ceiling where 1,000 colorful birds nested. There were terraced walls above the stalls bloomed with trees and flowers, while below merchants sold seemingly everything in the world. Daenerys is just being introduced into the vast wealth, and so she's trying to take it all in because she hasn't really seen something like this many times in her life. Remember, after her very early years, they were more on the run, right? After, again, the normal story that we have is that Daenerys was in Braavos. After that point, she was on the run quite a lot. Daenerys' horse shied away as Xaro approached on his camel, its ornate saddle adorned with horns. He offered to gift her anything she desired from the market, but Pyat Pri insisted that Qarth itself belonged to her, and urged her to visit the House of the Undying to drink of truth and wisdom. Already, 2 very different people are trying to court Daenerys, and if you're Daenerys, you got to be thinking, like, how much can you trust these men? These men don't know really anything about you, but they came to see these dragons almost out of nowhere, and now they're doing anything for you. Why? And that's the thing that I think Daenerys has got to figure out. Her whole journey in book 1 was about trusting and who she puts her faith in a lot of ways. And she's going to be feeling like, okay, Miri Mazdur, I trusted her and that didn't go so well. So she kind of has to be a little cautious here. Into page 319, Xaro dismisses Pyat Pri's offer, insisting that Daenerys did not need a palace of dust when he could offer her luxury. But I think the one thing that if you're Daenerys, where she's been following this red comet, she believes that this is going to lead her to her destiny. She's going to think about that later on in the chapter. The question is, what is that? And what the one thing that Daenerys is thirsting for is knowledge of what she can do, how she can move forward and reclaim, her home. She doesn't have that right now. She has a very small band of Dothraki, Jorah, and that's really it. So that is something that I think is going to be something that, the warlocks are able to kind of maybe manipulate her with. He promised that the 13 of Qarth would place a crown of black jade and fired opals upon her head. Dany, wary of sorcery after Miri Mazdur, declared that the only palace she desired was the Red Keep in King's Landing. You can understand Daenerys not wanting to mess around with magic. It really cost her a lot, albeit probably helped with her dragons, but she did lose everything. She's just gone through the Red Waste. She's probably lost a lot of weight. She's not as probably healthy. She's lost people. She's lost people on this march. She's lost her husband, her child, her brother, albeit, her brother was not the best person at times. It's still her brother, and it's something that she grew up with for a long time, and she will always think about Viserys. Viserys plays an active role in Daenerys' plotline, even though he's dead. She told Xaro that if the great lords of Qarth wished to give her gifts, they should provide ships and swords to reclaim her throne. But here's the issue, right? And Daenerys is right to understand what I want is the ability to go home and reclaim, Westeros or whatever. They're not going to give her those things. Okay, so if you're thinking, why aren't they going to give me those things? Because they want me here as what, like a trophy? Do they even care about me, or do they just want my dragons? That's something that instantly should be going through Daenerys' mind and be a bit of unease. Like, this pleasantry is happening now, but what happens when she wants to leave, or they want the dragons or something of that nature? Pyat Pri, smiling with his blue lips, agreed and drifted away, his long, beaded robes trailing behind him. Xaro murmured that Dany was wise beyond her years, warning her that a warlock's house is built of bones and lies. Dany questioned why the warlocks of Qarth were still revered if they were so powerless. Xaro admitted that the warlocks were once great, but had since become weak, clinging to old scrolls and drinking shade of the evening. Now, there's another reason, as a lot of you might be thinking of, why is Pyat Pri so interested in Daenerys? It's not only that, again, she's brought dragons into this world and she's the last Targaryen, or the last known one at this point outside of Aemon. So, okay, well, why does he want her besides that? The other part of that is Hyatt Pre probably realizes, wait, magic is starting to get stronger. Ever since Daenerys brought these dragons back, our magic is getting stronger. And so you think about that. You think about how the reputation of the warlocks has gone down, and it seems to equate to how the dragons left the world, that magic kind of left. And so I think that's really interesting to think about in terms of the motivations for someone like Pyat Pri. He warned that Pyat Pri's gifts would turn to dust in her hands before speeding away on his camel. Ser Jorah coming in with a very, I think, clever line. He rides in his Westerosi armor to kind of seem a bit more, how do I want to put this? Flamboyant, I guess, or a little bit more respected now. But he says that the crow calls the raven black. And I think this is a good line because Zaro and Pyat have very different motivations, but they both want things from Daenerys. And they are people that cannot be trusted, right? They are people that want things from Daenerys. It isn't like they're just giving her safe passage for no reason. He cautioned Daenerys to avoid both Zaro and Pyat Pri doubting their true intentions, which he's right to do. Don't get me wrong, Jorah is completely correct. There is other motivations here, though. Daenerys knows that. Jorah is lusting after her. We know that that's going to be a huge factor. It's really going to come out in a storm of swords, but we know that's a factor. But the other idea is, if you're Daenerys, what can you do? Without the people of Qarth, you would have been stuck in this place, as abandoned village for who knows how long. Possibly you would have died as soon as you left there, or maybe you would have died there in general. And then you go to Qarth, and it's like, well, what do you want me to do, Jorah? If I don't trust somebody, or at least use someone, use Zaro to where I have a living quarters for now, what am I going to be able to do? I don't have, any support. I have no army. I have no boats, nothing. That's what's going through my mind if I'm Daenerys. That, yes, I'm not going to trust these people, but I have to go along with this until I can figure out some better plan. Dany remained confident, believing Zaro's wealth and Pyat Pri's power, real or feigned, could help her reclaim her crown. Jorah scowled at the bazaar, distrustful of the city, and advised Daenerys not to linger. And he's right? We shouldn't be staying in a place like this, but for now, build up, try to figure out how you're going to gain strength. Dany playfully suggested that the smell he disliked might be the camels, not Qarth itself. But Jorah warned her that sweet smells often hide foul ones. Again, Jorah is giving some very good advice, albeit, like I said, this is the whole thing with Jorah in the books. He gives good advice, but it also has different motivations that are not so great. And that's the thing Daenerys kind of has to balance with right now, is like, Daenerys doesn't really, in my opinion, feel like she has anyone that's really close to her that just gives her, good advice because they want the best for her. Jorah is giving her good advice because he's in love with her, right? So he's trying to sleep with her at one point of this and all that stuff. But yeah, and Daenerys even thinks of that, right? Dany thinks that, Jorah is her great bear, knowing he would always protect her, which made her both feel safe and sad. She feels guilty because she knows she cannot give Jorah what he wants. Jorah wants basically her to be his wife or his concubine, whatever. And that's just never going to happen. Daenerys is not attracted to Jorah in any real way. Jorah is not a very attractive guy in the books whatsoever. And also, Daenerys probably thinks she needs to save herself for somebody that can give her more support. But that'll get us into page 320. Zaro offered Daenerys the hospitality of his palace while she stayed in Qarth. She had expected a pretty grand place, but was astonished to find a palace larger than any market town. Compared to Zaro's home, Magister Illyrio's manse in Pentos seemed like a swineherd's hovel. Again, put that into perspective. Illyrio is one of the wealthiest people in Pentos, and in Qarth, he's nothing, right? Just goes to show you how much wealth Qarth has. If Qarth really wanted to support Daenerys and back her in some way, they very easily could. Zaro claimed his palace could comfortably house all of her people and their horses. An entire wing was set aside for Daenerys, including gardens, a marble bathing pool, and a scrying tower, and even a warlock's maze. Think about that. Daenerys maybe doesn't have a large party, but she still has, I think it's around 100 people she has at the beginning of Daenerys 1 of Clash of Kings, so easily. This is just a wing of his palace. A wing. just tells you how rich this guy is. Like, Daenerys has multiple areas just for herself. That's crazy to think about. There were also slaves that were provided to tend to her every need. And this is something that also is going to build off of the first book. How Daenerys thinks about slaves. Now, it's not really brought up here, but it's something I wanted to note. Daenerys doesn't really think about the slaves all that much, but it's something that maybe in the back of her mind she might be thinking about. Her private chambers had green marble floors and walls draped in shimmering silk hangings. Dany thanks Zaro for his generosity, but she suspects the Great of Qarth came only to see her dragons, which she is correct in. She's not that gullible, she gets what's going on. Zaro promised a feast of peacock and lark's tongue and music befitting the most beautiful of women, which again, Daenerys realizes is flattery, something that Zaro likes to use. Pyat departed, promising to seek an audience with the Undying Ones, calling it an honor rare as summer snows. He kissed Dany's bare feet with his blue lips and gifted her an anointment that he claimed would let her see spirits. Very ominous stuff. Quaithe the Shadowbinder gave no gifts, but only a cryptic warning. So, unlike everybody else, Quaithe is somebody that is not showering Daenerys with gifts or comments or any of those things, but just warnings and advice. She tells Daenerys to beware, and Daenerys asks of whom, and Quaithe says all. Now, this is very interesting, right? Quaithe, where does she come from? Who is she? There's been many theories about this all throughout the Song of Ice and Fire community, and it's very interesting because Quaithe is one of the few people that seems to have Daenerys' true interests at heart. Don't trust these people of Qarth. They're going to use you, and that could lead to your downfall. And so that's something I think is really important here is how different Quaithe is compared to the others. She warned that many would come to see the rebirth of dragons and that they would lust for them, which is totally correct. For dragons are fire made flesh, and fire is power. There's another thing when we get to later in the books when, Daenerys is really getting away from her Targaryen side and she's reminded to remember who she is. This is what I believe Quaithe means, right? To remember that she is a dragon, that fire is power. Ser Jorah agreed with Quaithe's warning, but admitted he liked her no more than the others. Jorah is a very manipulative person. He doesn't like anyone to get close to Daenerys. He's in a weird way. This is gonna be a weird one because Jorah is maybe not something we compare to, but compared to this in the real world. But a lot of Jorah's behavior gives me the vibe of like an abusive husband. Just the way he goes about with Daenerys, like she cannot have anybody that gives her counsel or any of those things. She can only trust him. Do you see the parallels there? I don't know if it's just me, and maybe it's because I really dislike Jorah in the books compared to the show, but that's just the vibe I get from Jorah. And he's just a weird dude. Daenerys is 15. I know it's accepted in this book and all in this time period or whatever, but still weird to me. That's all I gotta say. Dany found Quaithe's cryptic nature unsettling and recalled the betrayal of Mirri Maz Dur. She's questioning who she can trust. And on this point of it, it's kind of the opposite, right? Quaithe is somebody that is not like kissing up to Daenerys or trying to manipulate her, it seems like, at this point anyway. But Daenerys still doesn't know if she can trust her. She ordered her blood riders to ensure no one entered her wing of the palace without her leave. She also commanded them to keep a close watch over the dragons at all times. Very smart. Aggo assured her that her orders would be carried out. Dany wanted to see more of Qarth than what Pyat had shown her. Daenerys doesn't want to be locked behind this palace, not knowing what this palace is truly about. It's kind of the same idea of like, this is the kind of the way I interpret it. She's trying to realize, like, what is there to Qarth? Is it all like this, right? Is it all really grand, or are there parts of it that aren't as good? The dirtier parts of Qarth, the places that you wouldn't want to see if you're maybe like a tourist or something. It's kind of the idea of like if you go to a major city or you go to a major like tourist attraction, you're gonna be shown the things that they want you to see. Whereas you might not get the whole picture, right? If you go to New York City, you might not see like all the bad parts of New York City. So kind of the vibe I get from that. I think it's really smart thinking by Daenerys. She sent Ricardo and a group of trusted men and women to explore the rest of the city and report back. As we get into page 321, Ricardo accepted Daenerys' order to explore Qarth with his usual loyalty. Daenerys instructed Ser Jorah to investigate the docks and learn about the ships in the harbor. She hoped to find news from Westeros and possibly a ship to take her home. She hadn't heard anything about Westeros, any news since what? A little like over the midpoint of a Game of Thrones. She's totally out of the loop. And so this is really smart again by Daenerys. It's one of those things that Daenerys is a lot smarter than people give her credit for. It's something she's going to use throughout the series. And she's only 15 and she's thinking these things through. But again, Jorah resists her order. He doesn't want to leave Daenerys alone. And again, it just gives me that abusive kind of relationship, controlling aspect of it. But he does eventually go as Daenerys urges it. Reluctantly, Ser Jorah agreed to her command because Jorah is the one person that can speak a lot of different languages and all of that stuff. And people might not be as uneasy as, of him than they are the Dothraki, right? People like Jorah, it's maybe it's much more rare to see them at Qarth, but Westerosi people probably come to Qarth every once in a while to trade, so Jorah will be more accepted. After her men had departed, Daenerys' handmaids helped her undress from her travel-stained silks. She bathed in a marble pool shaded by a portico where tiny golden fish playfully nibbled at her skin. She enjoyed the feeling of floating freely, savoring the rare moment of relaxation. Daenerys has not been in someone since the very beginning of Book 1 where she's been able to relax, where she's been able to just sit back and let all of her fears just out of her mind, all of that stuff. Daenerys has probably not felt this feeling many times in her entire life. And that feeling, unfortunately, is not going to last very long. But Dany wondered if Aegon's Red Keep had such pools and fragrant gardens as Viserys had claimed Westeros was the most beautiful place in the world. Again, that's another part of this, that you have to remember, everything that Daenerys knows about Westeros is from Viserys. And Viserys has hyped all of this stuff up way more than in reality it is. We know King's Landing is not the best place in the world. It's kind of deteriorated because of a lot of things, but upkeep is one of those things. And so you look at this and you go, okay, she's in Qarth, and this is a place that's much more decorative and glamorous than a place like King's Landing, for instance. But this unsettles her because it reminds her of home. It reminds her of what she was trying to do, of how Khal Drogo was once going to lead her to her conquest. But now she didn't really have anybody left. She had a few of her own blood riders, but outside of that, she didn't have much. She did not wish to leave King's Landing in ruins like the Dothraki would, but rather to make it a beautiful kingdom. And that's the big part of this, right? Daenerys does not want to come over to Westeros as a foreign invader burning down towns and taking and raiding all these places like the Dothraki culture would insist. She wants to be somebody that makes everything peaceful, and she wants to have a home. That's the biggest motivator. She wants security, safety, and a home. She imagined filling her realm with prosperous people, laughter, and peace, as Viserys claimed it had been under her father. Again, it's very interesting that we get this after an Arya chapter where people were remembering her father's time where it was peaceful, and this isn't necessarily how peace works, especially for the lower class, but in a lot of ways, she's right. Like, peace is a very good thing, and she wants to bring peace back to her home. Before she could build her dream, however, she knew she must conquer, and that's the biggest issue. And she's reminded of Jorah's words that Robert Baratheon would kill her as he had killed Rhaegar. At this point, Daenerys has no support. She has nobody backing her, really. She has no way of reclaiming Westeros, and even when her dragons get fully grown, she's only one person. She can only ride one of those dragons into battle, and we don't know how it's going to be with her trying to control 3 dragons. We don't know if she's even going to be able to do that, right? She's struggling with that and against dragons the whole time. But even further than that, like, she's just one dragon with like 100 guys, right? Could she maybe do with what Aegon did? Aegon didn't have the most amount of men either, when he started his conquest, but he also had his sisters. They had 3 huge dragons, and Meraxes and Vhagar and Balerion. So it's just different here. Daenerys is realizing she needs more support. But that also reminds her of the usurper's allies, the cold and unyielding Ned Stark, who she believes is still alive, and the powerful, treacherous Lannisters who stood against her. As of right now, she still believes that Westeros is united under Robert. How is she ever going to break that up? As we get into page 322, Dany questioned how she could overthrow such powerful men. Khal Drogo had ruled through fear and strength, but she had only a small Khalasar. And I want to really hone in on that moment for a second. Daenerys is going to try and rule with more of, love and compassion And we all see all throughout A Dance with Dragons and Storm of Swords as well, of course, that doesn't necessarily work all the time. And sometimes Daenerys has some lapses in judgment and does some things that resemble something like what Drogo would do. And I wonder if when we get into Winds of Winter, we get into the further parts of the story, if she remembers how Khal Drogo ruled, and if that has any influence on her, if she starts to lean more into ruling through fear and strength. I think that's an interesting idea that's brought up here that, we don't talk a ton about with especially the earlier books. She knew her people would follow her across the sea, but they were not enough. Even her dragons might not be enough. She realized Viserys had been foolish to believe that Westeros would rise for its rightful king. If you don't have a chance of winning, nobody is going to join you. That's just the case. Think about the Blackfires. For numerous times, after that first one, they didn't really get as close again, right? It was at its closest on that first one, and then their support kind of waned throughout each rebellion. And at this, doubt began to creep into her, making her shiver. The water now felt cold, and the fish in the pool irritated her. She climbed out, and she was dried and was dressed by her handmaidens. But again, it just reminds you of like if you're in a really good, moment or something, and just something creeps into your mind. Well, whether it's, something that you remember that something bad happened, or it's thinking about somebody that maybe is not alive anymore, or somebody not in your life anymore. That's kind of what Daenerys is having here, where she's just constantly being reminded of stresses of her life at this point, and of, people that are long past, Drogo and Viserys, for instance. She reminded herself that the comet had led her to Qarth for a reason. What is that reason? That's something that might push her going to see the warlocks. What is that? They have knowledge that they can offer, or at least that's what they say. If the gods intended her to conquer, they would provide a sign. If not, she did not finish the thought. If she can't conquer, what is she going to do? She can't live in Qarth forever. What is her plan and her goals? That evening, while feeding her dragons, Eerie announced Ser Jorah had returned from the docks with a visitor. A visitor we will see once again in this story. This will not be the only time we see the captain of the Cinnamon Wind. Jorah brought Corho Mo? I don't know about that pronunciation either. But I tried. A summer islander and captain of the Cinnamon Wind. Coro knelt and greeted Daenerys in Valyrian, and he revealed that his ship had called at Old Town before sailing east. He had a great gift for her, news. And this would be very important news. Now, I think this kind of rings hollow for the end of a chapter for Daenerys, because you think about all these other chapters we've had that have left on pretty big, cliffhangers throughout the story. And Daenerys just kind of rings hollow because it's like it's like this. It's like we all have the internet in this world. So like we know everything that's happening in Westeros, and then Daenerys is like getting it through the newspaper, but the newspaper's just really late. So she's just like getting a very delayed reaction to this news. But the captain tells her that Robert Baratheon is dead. This is a huge shock. This is a huge shock to Daenerys. This is the man that took down her entire family and is the reason she is on the run. That's a huge revelation for Daenerys. And you got to also always thinking about having to look over her back, looking for Robert's assassins. Well, that is now done. And Daenerys is almost too shocked to even respond to this. She's stunned as she repeats the news. Outside, dusk fell over Qarth, but within her, a new sun had risen. And even Drogon seemed to realize this as he hisses in her lap as pale smoke curled before her face. She demanded confirmation. Is the usurper dead? And as we get into page 323, Coro confirms this, that Robert Baratheon was dead. And there had been a number of rumors, we saw this in Arya's last chapter with the Game of Thrones. People in King's Landing were also speculating what's happening. Why is Ned Stark, a prisoner, and all this stuff, and how Robert died. Same idea here. And that's what Coro tells her, that again, he had been to ports in Old Town, Dorne, Lys, and all of these reports was that Robert was dead. Dany recalled that Robert had sent her poisoned wine, yet she lived while he was dead. The irony in the situation, Robert had all the power, but yet Daenerys was the one to live. She asked how he had died, and Coro says a number of things, and all they agree on is that Robert was now dead. Daenerys had never seen Robert, but his presence had loomed over her since birth. Now that shadow was gone. Something that Daenerys should be really happy about. It's at least some light in this pit of darkness that Daenerys feels she's in. Ser Jorah confirmed that Robert's son, Joffrey, was now king. Coro added that the Lannisters ruled, Robert's brothers had fled, and Lord Stark had been seized for treason. And Ser Jorah picks up on that right away. Ned would never do something like treason because he would never hurt his honor or something like that, which is ironic given the Tower of Joy stuff. But it is interesting that even Ser Jorah, someone that's not even been in King's Landing, knows that this doesn't seem right. It seems fishy. This rumor can't really be true. Daenerys dismissed Stark's honor, saying he had been a traitor to the rightful king, just like the Lannisters. Daenerys doesn't know anything about these families outside of they betrayed her family. And so she doesn't understand the context. It's something that's what is great about Barristan and Daenerys as we get further into the books is they could have these talks. Viserys never told Daenerys on, what was actually happening. Why did Robert's Rebellion start? What was, why was Aerys called the Mad King? These are all things that Daenerys has no idea. And so, of course, she's going to view somebody like Ned Stark as an awful person because he helped, put her and her brother into hiding and on the run. She was pleased to hear that Robert's allies were fighting among themselves, comparing it to the collapse of Drogo's Khalasar after his death, which is completely true. There's a really nice parallel there. But one thing I will say with Daenerys that she doesn't really realize is that this still doesn't matter. Unless she's coming over to Westeros right now with an army, none of this matters. She told Coro that her brother Viserys had also died, killed by Khal Drogo with a crown of molten gold. She wondered if Viserys would have been wiser had he known vengeance was so near. It is a thought. If Viserys knew that eventually this is what was going to happen, would he have stayed at Pentos? I still don't think so, given who Viserys was as a person, but it is a fruit for thought. Coro expressed sympathy for her loss and for Westeros, now without its rightful king. Now, this is interesting. Daenerys really plays with the idea in this chapter of, is she the person that should become the rightful queen? What is her role in the Targaryen legacy and dynasty? She questions that quite a little bit, and I think that is a little bit reflected in how her dragon Rhaegal reacts. Because Rhaegal seems to have a little bit of a reaction to that. Not like not like Rhaegal's attacking the man or anything like that, but Rhaegal seems to watch the captain with glowing golden eyes and his teeth sharp as needles. Dany asked when the Cinnamon Wind would return to Westeros. Now, Daenerys is obviously seeking passage to get back home, but Coro regretfully told her it would not return for at least a year as it was heading east. Daenerys was disappointed but wished him fair winds and thanked him for the precious gift of news. Now, this changes a lot for Daenerys' perspective of what's happening in Westeros, but it doesn't actually change a lot for Daenerys. Yes, the situation for other people is getting worse, right? Like people are openly fighting each other in Westeros, but her situation has not gotten better. She's only declined in power and in terms of where she is right now outside of having dragons, which is again great, but they're babies basically. Daenerys also mentioned that whenever she, retook her home, that she would pay Coro for the news, but Coro told Daenerys that he had already been repaid. She was puzzled and asked how. He smiled and said, "I have seen dragons." This is something that is a kind of a playful remark, right? And Daenerys takes this, very good, but think about what that means for other people. There's not going to be people as nice to Daenerys. They're going to want more than just to see the dragons. Daenerys laughed and told him he would see more when she reclaimed her father's throne in King's Landing. She promised him a great reward if he visited her there. Coro promised to do so and kissed her fingers before leaving. Once they were alone, Ser Jorah warned Daenerys not to speak so freely of her plans. He cautioned that Coro would spread the tale of her intentions, which is true, right? If you're looking at, battle intentions or things like that, you don't necessarily want to give away what you're going to do. But Daenerys doesn't really care, saying she wanted the world to know her purpose. Jorah reminded her that even if Robert was dead, his son ruled in his place, so it did not truly change anything. I agree with Jorah on this point. Like, yes, things are a bit different at this point, and yes, there's some fighting in Westeros, and they're weakening themselves a bit, but not changed anything for Daenerys at this point. She still has no support. Dany strongly disagreed, believing Robert's death changed everything. She compared the Seven Kingdoms to Khal Drogo's Khalasar, once unified by his strength, but now falling to pieces after his death. But Jorah pointed out that the High Lords of Westeros had always fought, and that war alone would not win her the throne, which is 100% true. He tells her that she would need a fleet, gold, armies, and alliances, and that is the truth. The hard truth, but it is the truth. Dany acknowledged this, but reminded him she was no longer the frightened girl he had met in Pentos. She asserted that despite being only 15, she had endured great hardships and carried the blood of the dragon. It's Daenerys being a little overconfident, and maybe that's she has to be. She's a leader. She cannot show weakness or indecisiveness. I mean, she's really going to play with that idea as we go forward. But at the same time, Jorah is right. The practicality of Daenerys' claim right now is she really doesn't have a great one right now because she has no support. Jorah compared her to her brother Viserys, and Daenerys declared that she was not Viserys, obviously. At this point, Daenerys is very different than Viserys. But Jorah concluded that she had more of Rhaegar in her, but even Rhaegar had been slain. He warned her that even dragons can die. But Daenerys responded by kissing his cheek and whispering, "Dragons die, but so do dragon slayers." Really weird conversation to end out the chapter. Yeah, I guess Daenerys has a little bit of Rhaegar in her, but I don't see that, right? Like, I don't know. I know a lot of people like to compare Rhaegar to Daenerys. I don't see the comparison at all. They don't seem similar at all. Like, based off what we know of Rhaegar, he seems like this very like tortured musician type, and Daenerys does not give that vibe at all. Daenerys gives more of a Aegon the Conqueror type vibe, in my opinion, or maybe like a mix of like Rhaenyra, Visenya, Rhaenys type idea. But yeah, so really weird comparison, in my opinion, but also really weird statement. Like, oh yeah, dragons can die, but so can dragon slayers. Like, all we're just saying here is that people can die. Like, obviously. So yeah, I don't know. Like, Daenerys to me in this book is not necessarily that good because a lot of her stuff doesn't really matter. Like, she just feels so disconnected from the story. Like, we're almost halfway through this book, and Daenerys is getting realizations that, oh yeah, stuff that happened in like the last quarter of the last book happened. That's her big reveal. Again, I'm not the biggest fan of Daenerys in this book. I think that if Daenerys was not in this book at all, I think this book would be so much better. I do love the House of the Undying stuff at the end of the book for her, and I like bits and pieces of the themes and stuff. It's just, to me, chapters like this, when we go to Daenerys, when, you know, we're fresh off of things happening in Westeros, like Robb's campaign, Arya at Harrenhal at the Riverlands, and Theon with the Greyjoy stuff, and Tyrion and Stannis, and you go to Daenerys where her plotline is pretty irrelevant to the rest of Westeros. She's not even going to have a chance of coming to Westeros until like the end of the next book. She just feels very disconnected from the story. And I know a lot of people do love Daenerys, and I think even people that this isn't the case for everybody because I've seen some people really like her in this book. But I think even people that like Daenerys, I am somebody that's not a hater of Daenerys. I like Daenerys. She's not my favorite character, or like even in my top 10 probably, but I like her. I think she's a good character. This book is not good for her. If you could tell in this chapter, it was a lot of just describing things. It was a lot of like surface level stuff it's like, okay, I get what George needed to tell this because he's trying to get the Qarth plot going and you're going to a new city and all this stuff, but it's not a lot really happened in this chapter when you really truly think about it. But thank you guys all for watching. I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye guys.